NFL trade market is heating up, so in this video, we're going to go over 8 players who might get traded this offseason. If you guys do go on to enjoy the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Let's hop into it. Before we get into the 8 players who might get traded, I do want to hand out a couple of honorable mentions. These are players who might get traded, but also very well could end up being cap casualties. For starters, there's T. Higgins, who recently got put on a franchise tag. Now, does that potentially make a situation where he decides to hold out to get a bigger contract, which eventually leads to him getting traded? Maybe. I kind of doubt it. Then there's Mark Andrews. The Ravens really need to find some new weapons around Lamar Jackson. Mark Andrews is still a very good player, but I think ultimately he's likely not going to get dealt. I could see him being a bit more of a cap casualty. Then there's Greg Newsome. Injuries really are holding him back. He's a really good player when he's on the field, but because of his injury history, I could see a world where Cleveland decides to open up more cap space by just ultimately cutting him and letting him go somewhere else. But at the same time, he very well could get traded too. With that all said, let's go ahead and hop into our top 8, and we are going to begin with number 8, DeAndre Swift. Now, DeAndre Swift last year had almost 1,000 yards. He had 959 yards, 6 touchdowns, 42 receptions. This is somebody who has been pretty productive throughout his career. Obviously, the Philadelphia Eagles, where he had 1,000 yards in 2023. Prior to that, with the Detroit Lions, his role was a little bit diminished because of who they already had in the backfield and the fact that the coaching staff just really didn't trust DeAndre Swift. In these past 2 years, when he has been given plenty of opportunities, he's been pretty good. Now, again, there are some major flaws to DeAndre Swift's game. He's somebody who I don't really know if you can have him be a 3-down back, but if you want to use him as sort of your second option alongside a more bruisier styled back, for example, putting him next to hypothetically like a Najee Harris, I think could make for a good combination. Ultimately, though, for the Chicago Bears team, I feels like they kind of want to go a little bit younger in that position, and it kind of feels like Ben Johnson is going to likely target potentially like an Ashton Genty or an Amarian Hampton in this year's draft. So with that being said, DeAndre Swift might want out of the team because he might want to be seen as the premier back, and if that is the case, then I could see a world where he does request a trade. And from what I've already heard, it does sound like Chicago is already kind of taking some calls on DeAndre Swift, so it will be interesting to see if he ends up getting traded, because he does appear to be a quality back who can give you some really good, runs here and there, as well as being a really solid receiving threat. I think he's also solid in the red zone area too because of his receiving ability. So I could see a team taking a flyer on DeAndre Swift to just have him be as a second option next to, as I mentioned, a more traditional running back such as like a Najee Harris. DeAndre Swift is a really solid athlete. He can do a lot of things in the receiving game, so there is a role for him in the league, and I do think Chicago is a team that would be willing to give him up for like a 6th or 7th round pick to just kind of get a bit more talent in this roster. Next up at number 7, we have Derek Carr of the New Orleans Saints. As we all know, the New Orleans Saints are an absolute cap hell, and I think one way they could potentially try to figure out this cap situation is by getting off some big time contracts such as Derek Carr. With new head coach Kellen Moore in the building, it's probably likely that he would kind of want a clean slate to work with a new quarterback, with some new pieces, and hopefully a fixed up salary cap. In doing so, I do think Derek Carr potentially could be dealt to a team that maybe might be desperate for a quarterback. I don't really know which team would be desperate enough to trade for Derek Carr of all quarterbacks, but let's just throw out a hypothetical scenario where the New York Giants aren't able to sign Sam Darnold, they don't want Aaron Rodgers, and they are not able to go out there and get a quarterback like Shador or Cam Ward in this year's draft. Maybe they draft Jackson Dart in the 2nd round, and maybe they trade for Derek Carr to be their veteran in the building type of guy. I do think Derek Carr is a fine quarterback when he's healthy. I thought last year to start the season off, he was looking really solid. I mean, obviously they were like 2-0 and everyone had them in their top 10, and then they absolutely fell apart. A big reason why was, well, injuries. The team dealt with injuries all year long, but when Derek Carr and that team was healthy, I thought Derek Carr put together a couple really solid games, and even when the team was really banged up, I still thought Derek Carr was keeping the team competitive. He's a veteran. He's been in the league for many, many years. He's been in the league since 2014. It does not feel like he is getting up there in age, but he's already 33 years of age. At this stage of his career, I don't know if you see him as a long-term starter at this point. So I think if you are to take Derek Carr, he's going to be your veteran in the building to kind of help mature up a younger quarterback, kind of like what Andy Dalton has done for Bryce Young, but maybe a smidge more expensive, and also somebody who could potentially be a starter for a year while you are developing a quarterback beneath him. So if you are a team like New York, or I don't know, the Jets, or a team like the Raiders, which that would be kind of interesting, maybe there is the possibility of going out there and trading for Derek Carr. I don't think it would cost you much, probably a 6th or 7th round pick, if even that. Again, Derek Carr, I mean, statistically speaking, he's been pretty good these past several years. I mean, last year he had, in a short amount of games, 2,100 yards, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. The year prior, almost 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 8 picks. So this is somebody who you know what you're getting from. He's not a Pro Bowl level guy, but he's just a solid quarterback that can get get the job done. Again, if your team is looking for a veteran who can start for a year while they're developing a quarterback beneath them, I think Derek Carr very well could be an option, but at the same time, the Saints just might keep him and just sort of ride one more year with him. Next up at number 6 is going to be Kyle Pitts from the Atlanta Falcons. This is somebody who we all know the talent that Kyle Pitts possesses. He's huge, he's young, he's athletic, he's 6'6", 247, only 24 years of age, and it feels like everybody in the league is kind of out on Kyle Pitts. I mean, this is somebody who in his rookie year had 1,000 yards, and since then hasn't even crossed the 700-yard mark. I mean, this is somebody who clearly has the talent to play at a high level, clearly has the ability to play the position at a level that puts him within the top 10 tight ends in the league, but at the same time, you just haven't seen the consistency from him. You haven't seen him really develop much of a game that you would want to see it. I think in some ways it's because of his fit in Atlanta, where Atlanta doesn't really use the tight end position maybe the way that would bolster his performance. But if there is a team out there that has a void at the tight end position that maybe wants the tight end position to be a bigger part of their offense, I think Kyle Pitts would actually make for a really interesting option, especially if they use him the right way. We've already heard a bit of rumors that the Patriots are looking at Kyle Pitts, and frankly, I think that would be really interesting because they already have a couple other tight ends in the building, but they don't really have a Kyle Pitts type of guy. So if they were to trade for Kyle Pitts, I'd find that very interesting. There should also be a bunch of other teams really interested in his services. A team like Jacksonville, who probably going to lose Evan Ingram. I think Kyle Pitts would make a lot of sense there. So I think there will be a market for Kyle Pitts. It just kind of comes down to how much will it cost. I think maybe a 4th or 3rd round pick, but maybe it might be a little bit more cheap than that. Kyle Pitts is looking for a new contract, so that definitely could potentially lower his value in the open market. But I do think that there will be some teams interested in his services. Again, you are 6'6" and you have the jumping ability, the 50-50 ball ability of a guy like Kyle Pitts. You're going to have a market out there in the NFL. It just kind of comes down to which team is going to ultimately make the trade for Kyle Pitts. It's been very disappointing, his tenure with the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, his rookie year was so unbelievably promising, and everyone was already putting him in the top tight end conversation with the likes of, I guess at that point, like a Travis Kelce of the world. I mean, nobody thought he was better than Kelce, but people had him within their top 10s after his rookie season, and the future looked unbelievably bright. And since then, he hasn't really looked the same, nor has he looked like he's been that big of a part of the offense, which is extremely bizarre given the talent that this guy has. So I do think that there will be a team out there willing to give him a shot. And if there is a team out there willing to give him a shot, I think they're going to get a great young player that if you develop him properly, and maybe not develop him, I should say, maybe if you use him properly, I think he can go out there and be a fantastic tight end option for whatever team does take him. It'll be interesting to see if the Falcons do decide to trade him and where he might end up going to. Next up is number 5, Jair Alexander. Now, Jair very well could end up being a cap casualty because of, at this stage, his injury history, his age, and so on and so forth. But I still do believe that Jair Alexander would have a market if he were to actually get out of Green Bay. This is somebody who, when healthy, is one of the better cornerbacks out there in the league. It just kind of comes down to, can this guy stay healthy? When healthy, Jair Alexander, he's a great ball hawk. He's sticky in coverage. He can make plays. He's also somebody who could be a bit of a culture guy too. This is somebody who brings energy. He brings an excitement. His game is fun to watch. He's also a big name guy who basically everyone in the NFL community knows. So I would be a little bit shocked if he was ultimately just straight up cut, but at the same time, Jonathan Allen just got cut, so you just never know. If there is a market for Jair Alexander, I don't think it would cost as much as you might think. Some people might think a day 2 pick. I think it's likely going to cost maybe a 5th or 6th round pick for Jair Alexander. It's kind of crazy to say that, but with his injury history these past few years, I wouldn't want to give up a 3rd round pick for somebody who I cannot guarantee is going to be on the field for more than half the season. But if you can just get a somewhat healthy year from Jair Alexander that gets him into the playoffs healthy, then I think you're probably making a safe bet to give up a 4th or 5th round pick for the guy. Again, when he's been on the field, when he's been healthy, you feel really confident in. He's a really solid player. Some people might question, his toughness in some sense, but I'm not here to do that. I do believe that when he has been on the field, he's been incredibly solid, and if they can just get that guy on the field consistently for 70% of snaps out there or 70% of games, maybe, I think that he would be worthy of a 4th round pick, especially if he does play up to the expectations that we know him to be. Can be a Pro Bowl level player, can be an all-pro level player. Just comes down to his health, and if it does happen, I think they're getting a good player. Ultimately, though, we'll have to wait and see if he ends up being a cap casualty and just ends up on the open free market where he can sign wherever. But if he does get traded, I think it would make a lot of sense for whatever team does trade for him, especially if they're like a team that has a bit of open cap cap space, maybe a team like Washington. I don't know. All right, moving on to number 4, we have Cooper Kupp. This one is one of the older trade candidates that we've seen at this point, where he's been on the market now for the past couple weeks. It was kind of interesting. Usually you hear a player go to a front office and ask for a trade. I think it was in this situation where the Rams just kind of blatantly said that we're going to trade Cooper Kupp. Pretty interesting how that ultimately worked out. And it's kind of sad because, man, Cooper Kupp is just such a fantastic player. It's just been really unfortunate that these past 3 years, he just has not been able to consistently stay healthy, because kind of like Jair Alexander, when he's been on the field, it's been fantastic. It's just sometimes he misses 5, 6, 7 games a season, and that could be really frustrating. We're talking about somebody that had almost 2,000 passing or receiving yards in 2021, and since then hasn't even eclipsed 850 yards. And I think that's primarily because of injuries. If you look back at these past few years, he's been playing really good when he's been out there, and arguably could get up to that 1,000 yard mark again, but just hasn't been able to do so, which is just, it sucks to see. But I do think there will be a market out there for Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp at this stage of his career probably would not be considered your number 1 option. He's probably better suited as a number 2 guy. And if you have a big time playmaker on the outside and you stick him inside more as a slot guy and just have him develop his chemistry with whatever quarterback, I think Cooper Kupp can be a valuable option for whatever team. Unlike the players beforehand, I do think Cooper Kupp would have a pretty big market that would maybe warrant a day 2 pick. I could see a team giving up a 3rd round pick for Cooper Kupp. It might end up being a 4th rounder or maybe even a 5th rounder because of his injury history. But I mean, if you're getting 70% of normal Cooper Kupp, I do think it's kind of worth a 3rd round pick. And again, if you're a team that has a number 1 option but is just looking for that number 2 guy, I think Cooper Kupp would make a lot of sense, especially if you have a number 1 option that's more of an outside wide receiver and you're just kind of looking for that slot guy. I could think of a couple teams out there that could definitely use his services. You look at a team, I hate to say it, like the Philadelphia Eagles. Imagine having Cooper Kupp in the slot with AJ Brown on the outside and Devontae Smith kind of just working with those two. I mean, I'm not going to say they're going to trade for him, but it would make sense. I also think a team like the Giants would make some sense too, with Malik Neighbors on the outside, Cooper Kupp in the slot. I do think though that the Rams would want to trade him to a contender, likely in the AFC. Pittsburgh also makes a lot of sense there as well. So because the wide receiver position is such a big time need, especially having a second wide receiver option next to somebody out there, I do think that he will ultimately get traded. It kind of sucks that it didn't work out with the Rams. I'd like to see him retire a Ram, but at this stage of his career, he probably wants to go out there and compete at a high level, and I think there'll be a lot of teams out there interested in his services. Cooper Kupp, fantastic player, great career with the LA Rams. I'm very intrigued to see where he ends up next. Staying on the receiving room here at number 3, we have DK Metcalf. This one kind of came out of nowhere, and he's now in a lot of trade rumors, and it does appear like he ultimately will end up being traded. To be honest with you, I don't love this decision from Seattle if they were to trade him, because I feel like JSN is better suited as like a pseudo number 2 option, and DK can be the number 1 guy. Or, you know, it doesn't really matter who's the number 1 or 2 guy, but you just have DK on the outside and JSN playing a bit more within the slot. DK Metcalf, I mean, the highs of DK Metcalf are incredible. He can make so many incredible plays. He can just take over games at certain points, but he's also a little inconsistent, where at times he can just be completely quiet and you just kind of forget that he's even out there on the field. Some people have come out and say DK is a smidge overrated, and if you're saying that DK Metcalf is like a top 10 receiver in the league, then yes, you're probably overrating him a smidge. But if you say that DK Metcalf is like a top 20 receiver, then I think that you're probably right in his realm of where he should be. I do think he will have a pretty large market out there, likely probably a day 2 pick. A 2nd or 3rd round pick makes a lot of sense in my opinion. And again, if you're a team that maybe has the vice versa issue from a Cooper Kupp thing, where maybe you have like one really good receiver, or maybe you have a group of solid receivers but are just looking for that number 1 go-to guy, I think DK could very well make a lot of sense for a couple of different teams. You look at a team like the Packers, who need a more of an outside number 1 option. I think that could make some sense, especially if maybe you could throw in a Romeo Doubs in the trade too and give Romeo Doubs back to Seattle. That could be pretty fun. The Patriots also make a lot of sense too. They need a number 1 guy. They were in the T. Higgins market. T. Higgins likely not going to get traded, so maybe you go for a guy like DK Metcalf. I think that could also make a lot of sense. There's a lot of teams out there. I do think there will be a big market for him. You're probably not going to get a 1st or 2nd round pick, but I could see a 3rd or 4th round pick being sent for DK Metcalf. I think it makes a lot of sense to go out there and trade for him. I don't think it necessarily makes sense for Seattle Seattle to want to trade him because, again, I kind of feel like Seattle's better suited when they have two go-to guys. Tyler Lockett is no longer on the team, so if they were to trade DK Metcalf, JSN becomes really your only viable option. I mean, you have Bobo, who, shout out Bobo, but I mean, if you have him as your number 2 option, then like, what are we talking about? But I don't know. I don't love the idea of trading him for Seattle because I do believe that you need at least 2 good wide receivers, and I just don't feel like outside of JSN you really have anyone. Moving over to number 2, we have Trey Hendrickson. This one, I really do not understand what the Bengals are doing. Not paying T. Higgins, now potentially moving off of Trey Hendrickson, not paying, I don't think they paid Jamar Chase yet, correct me if I'm wrong, but man, this is just such a bad situation for the Bengals to be in. I understand they don't really have a rich owner, so they don't have the money to hand out massive contracts to everybody, but like Trey Hendrickson's one of the best players in the NFL. Like, I think we sometimes underrate this guy. I don't know why, but everyone, including myself, just kind of forgets that this guy is like the best pass rusher in the NFL. Better than Micah Parsons, TJ Watt, arguably a better pass rusher than like Myles Garrett. I mean, I think there's a legit conversation for him to be the best pure pass rusher in the NFL, and I don't think the numbers lie. He led the NFL with 17.5 sacks this year, had 17.5 sacks last year, 8 sacks in 2022, 14 in 21, 13.5 in 2020. I mean, this dude has been an absolute monster for the Cincinnati Bengals, and it's astonishing that a team like the Bengals that want to compete for a championship would even consider trading a guy like Trey Hendrickson, who has been proven to be a productive player. And it's not like he's old. He's only 30 years old. Easily probably has another 4 years of dominant play ahead of him. And you're going to trade him for what? A first or second round pick that may end up being something worthwhile? I do think that he will work out a contract with the Bengals. Let me just make that very clear. If they were to trade him, I think it'd be a massive mistake. But I do think that there is a world where the Bengals maybe want to see what they potentially could get. Can they get like 2 first round picks? If they can, maybe they get a deal done. But if they can't, I think they'll foster up enough money to get this guy paid. At least they should, because again, I think Trey Hendrickson is just a fantastic player. If we do assume that for whatever reason he were to get traded, his market it'd be pretty insane. I think there'd be a lot of teams that'd be willing to give up a first or second round pick for him, probably even multiple picks if they really asked for it. I mean, it's really hard to find somebody that can consistently get you 10 sacks a season, and Trey Hendrickson has proven the ability to get you close to 17 sometimes. So if I'm a team out there that needs a go-to pass rusher and I have the money, I would be all in on Trey Hendrickson, especially if I can't get my hands on like a Myles Garrett, which, spoiler alert, Myles Garrett's number 1. I don't think anyone's shocked by that. But if you can't get your hands on a Myles Garrett, I think Trey Hendrickson is a really, maybe just as good as Myles Garrett. I don't think he's the same run stuffer that Garrett is, but as a pass rusher, he obviously really is. So if you're a team out there like Washington or the LA Chargers, or, you know, one of those teams that needs a premier pass rusher, the Panthers, if you can make up the money to pay Hendrickson, I don't think you think twice about sending a first round pick, because let's say you're the Panthers, right? You have a top 10 pick, and let's say you take Jalen Walker. Walker's a fantastic player, but who's to say that Walker will ever become half the player that Trey Hendrickson is? No, I'm just saying that as an example. I don't think the Panthers should trade for Hendrickson, because I think they should go younger, and maybe probably shouldn't prioritize a 30-year-old, but, you know, let's just go with Washington, for example. If Washington were to trade a first round pick, I mean, I'd rather have Trey Hendrickson than like maybe Michael Williams or Nick Scowerton. So yeah, I just think Trey Hendrickson being on the board here is a little ridiculous, especially because the Bengals are trying to contend for a championship. I don't think he gets traded. I think the Bengals will figure something out. They would be stupid to trade him. So yeah. But as I mentioned, number 1 is Myles Garrett. I think Myles Garrett should get traded. And this is not because the Browns are just that bad of a team, but I just think that the haul of picks that you could get from Myles Garrett would be worthwhile for a team like the Browns, who are clearly at this point moving off of Deshaun Watson, probably going in a new direction at the quarterback position. Maybe it's Cam Ward, maybe it's Shedeur Sanders, maybe it's a veteran for one more year, and then next year you take a quarterback, maybe Arch Manning comes out, or Nico from Tennessee, who knows, right? Whatever the case may be, if I am the Browns, I don't think my window to win a championship is over the course of the next 3 to 4 years, which is really the prime of Myles Garrett's career. So if I know for a fact that I'm probably not going to be seriously contending for championships over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, if I trade Myles Garrett for a haul of picks that could very well include 2 first rounders, I think I would do it, especially if those first rounders are 2026 and 2027 first round picks. Again, let's use the Washington example in this scenario. Let's say Washington gives you their next 2 first round picks. If you're the Browns moving forward, you hypothetically take Cam Ward with your 2nd overall pick, and then you're moving into the future with Cam Ward as your quarterback and 4 first round picks over the course of the next 2 years. years. Not to mention, you do have some other candidates out there that could get traded. Like I said, Greg Newsome, Denzel Ward, Jack Conklin. He might end up being a cap casualty. Jerry Jeudy. But there's a lot of players in this team that you very well could trade to get as much draft capital as you physically can to surround your young quarterback with just a really well-rounded young roster. I love Myles Garrett. I think Myles Garrett has the case to be the best player in the NFL. And I know trading the best player in the NFL is almost never a good idea. But when you are a team like the Cleveland Browns that clearly are not going to be contending for a championship, especially when there's teams like the Ravens, the Steelers, the Bengals within your division, I kind of think that you maybe just decide to go with an absolute young youth movement and see if you can build a really good young squad and then surround those guys with veterans in the future. I understand it's Myles Garrett. You don't want to give up the guy who's arguably the best player in the league, who's homegrown in Cleveland. I understand. But if you can get 2 first-round picks, hell, you might even be able to get a smidge more than just 2 first-round picks if a team is desperate enough. Myles Garrett's just that freaking good. So yeah, if I was them and if I get the right haul, I would do it. Now I will say this, if I don't get multiple picks, I probably wouldn't do it. Unless I get like the number 1 pick, then maybe I'd consider it. But if I can go to a team like Washington, demand 2 first-round picks and get that, I would do it probably in a heartbeat, as much as I know that Myles Garrett is fantastic. But you guys let me know in the comment section below, what do you guys think of these different trade candidates and where do you guys think these players will ultimately end up? Let me know. And if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button. Love you guys. Peace.